The 18 Strong Podcast with Jeff Pellizzaro, episode number 4.
Welcome to the 18 Strong Podcast, where you get direct access to the world's greatest experts on training harder, practicing smarter, and playing better golf. Now, here's your host, Jeff Pellizzaro.
Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome to the 4th episode of the 18 Strong Podcast. Thanks again for joining us. All the feedback has been great. Really appreciate all the kind words from everybody. Today's guest is a very exciting guest, not only because he works with the Titleist Performance Institute and works at one of the greatest clubs in the nation, Mission Hills, but his background is so extensive with the research that he's done, with the education that he has, that I'm really excited to have Dr. Mark Smith on the show today, and he's a guy that knows his stuff. He has a ton of experience with research. Today's episode, we really talk a lot about high-intensity interval training, the Paleo diet, and how that applies to you as a golfer, and how you can utilize that to make improvements in your game, and then just overall cardiovascular health and some of the things that you can do to really improve your cardiovascular health along with, again, your golf game. And, if you want to know anything about these 3 topics, this is the guy to go to, Dr. Mark Smith, because he's had affiliation with some of the top researchers in these fields. So we get a little bit technical, especially when we're talking about the high-intensity stuff, but I want you to know that we do get in and clarify it a little bit more in layman's terms. So don't get lost when we start talking about it initially, because we do kind of clarify a little bit more. I should say Mark clarifies a little bit more. And then lastly, Mark shares with us what I think is one of the most simple frameworks for a workout routine that you can pretty much do anywhere. So don't miss that part. It's probably one of the most intelligent ways to look at a workout program, when you're on the road or don't have anything, or you're kind of caught off guard with when and where you can get your workout in. And it's just a very simple approach that I think is phenomenal. So enjoy the episode, and I'll catch you on the end. Hey, everybody. Welcome to the 18 Strong Podcast, where I've got a bit of a special treat for you guys today. I have Dr. Mark Smith with us today. And Mark is probably one of the most highly educated gentlemen I've had the opportunity to interact with on a professional level, and have learned from just through some of the courses of TPI and just some of the things that I see him doing online. And first of all, I just want to say welcome, Mark. Thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me, Jeff. My pleasure to be here.
And just a little bit of background info on Dr. Smith here. He received his bachelor's degree over at Loughborough University of Technology in England, and then got his master's degree in exercise and sports science at Colorado State University, which was then followed up by his doctorate in physiology. Mark had the opportunity to work directly with Dr. Lauren Cordain of the Paleo diet while he was at Colorado State. And he's one of the foremost experts on the topic of high-intensity interval training, which is where I learned a lot of my information on interval training. Mark also has his own practice at Mission Hills Country Club in Rancho, Mirage, California, and is now an advisory board member for the Titleist Performance Institute and lectures for many of their certification programs. So, Mark, I've given the listeners just a little bit of background information on you, but we, as always, want to get to know you as not just the fitness professional, but as a person as well. So feel free to give us a little bit more personal info, and then go into some more details about who you are, what you're doing, and who you're working with.
Okay, yeah, I guess a little bit about me. Started when I was young. I was a jock, athlete. I was basically tennis and rugby as a kid, but focused more on rugby once I got to about the age of 16. Was pretty successful at that, and the top college, you had a pretty good pronunciation of Loughborough is the way that we always pronounce that, and that's the kind of the mecca if you want to do sports in the UK. And I applied to go there, lucky enough to get in there, and they've got a very big and well-established rugby program there, so that was great to go through that, and played first-team rugby there, and pretty much thought I would probably going to just play competitive rugby in the UK, but it had not yet turned professional. It was right before it turned professional, so I I was interested in coming to the States for a year and actually playing rugby for a year, which is what I did. A few of my college teammates had done that, and it was just a sort of a fun time to get out, get away, and play some rugby in the States. And I often tell people aren't aware of how big rugby is in the States. Although it's actually, now that it's become an Olympic sport, it's getting a lot more press. NBC are obviously covering it, and it's getting a bit more high profile even in the college ranks now. But anyway, so I did that, and then while I was here during that year, I started to look into graduate school here, and a friend of mine had gone out he was a rugby player at Loughborough as well, and he didn't take a year out. He just went straight to Colorado State. So while I was in the off season, I came out to Boston when I first headed out here. And obviously a lot of snow on the ground during the winter, not much rugby going on. So I headed out west to Breckenridge in Colorado, where he was hanging out during his Christmas break. So I just took sort of a month to 2 months and just skied there. And while I was there, I went out to meet him at Colorado State and met the head of department there, and was able to pretty much negotiate a position and an assistantship, having done my teaching certificate at Loughborough as well. So it had a good reputation. So that pretty much started the ball rolling of where I am today. I took the Master's in Exercise Physiology, was fortunate enough to be able to transfer over to the Physiology department, where I focused my research on heart disease, and particularly atherosclerosis, the buildup of plaque in arteries. And it was while I was doing that I met Laurent Cordain. Well, I shouldn't say that. I mean, he was my advisor during my master's, but it was during my doctoral years that we started connecting a bit more on the Paleolithic nutrition. And then when I finished my doctorate, we got into almost like a postdoc. We were meeting on a regular basis every week, reading papers, coming up with ideas. And so I was very much at the ground level of when that whole movement sort of started. So I feel sort of privileged to have been involved in that from the very beginning. And, it's obviously taken off in another way now. And it's been interesting to see that growth. And I'm sure we can talk more about that later. And then from there, I ended up, the head of department was involved in a project with a product, but it was all about the high intensity interval training. So that's then when I finished my doctorate, looking for things to do. That was the choice I made, and I started getting heavily into the research on high intensity interval training. And being an affiliate faculty with Lauren in the department, I was able to also get some research done in the early days, and that just continued from there. And then coming full circle to where I'm at now, in that capacity. I was doing lectures around the country, and we weren't specifically in golf right away, but someone had said, hey, golf's getting into fitness. So I remember going to the PJ Merchandise Show. It was probably around 2000. So I remember meeting Greg Rose there. Jeff Banaszak was a name that was starting to do it. So this was really, really early on, long before TPI had started, although I think Greg and Dave, they were already doing what they were doing on the East Coast. But I was very unaware of really what was going on in golf fitness. So, the first PGA show we did, there was nothing like it is today. There were a handful of us there, but we were all, I think if we all were to be honest and say, our knowledge there of what it is today is vastly different. So, and from there, one of the gentlemen that was influential in me getting into the golf fitness business was Rob Mottram, who was also perhaps considered one of the pioneers in golf fitness. He had a place in the desert, a golf performance studio, probably one of a handful at that time, I would say. He had worked on the PGA Tour, the LPGA Tour, the Senior Tour in the very, very early days. And we were coming out doing lectures, and we were focusing on the interval training research. And I just did a lecture out here in the desert. And he, I think, was always like, who's coming onto my turf to sort of talk? And funnily, my business partner had chosen the middle of July to do this, and I didn't know anything about the desert, so we didn't exactly have a packed room. And I think Rob was looking to, he was almost came in, realized that we didn't look like we were much competition, was ready to leave. But he stayed and listened, and then, of course, he liked what he heard. So he and I started working together, and I started coming out to the desert quite frequently. We did a couple of research projects at his performance studio, and a couple of years after that, before I knew it, Rob was going to be leaving that studio and starting at Mission Hills. They were kind of headhunting him to get over there, and he was like, hey, here's a good opportunity. You should come with me, and we'll kind of work as a team together there. And that's what we did. So that's what got me to Mission Hills. Rob has since moved on. He's now out at what's the course out in Scottsdale? Something Mountain. I forget the name of it. It's a big place with like 3 courses, maybe even more than 3. And so he's out there, but I stayed at Mission Hills, and he and I I got into TPI through Rob. He invited me over to meet Greg and Dave, and I think the first time I met Greg and Dave, we did the one of the very first, I think it was like season 2, episode 8 of the Golf Channel, the Golf Fitness Academy. And we did it on kind of a very quick workout in and out of the gym. I did the interval training, and Rob did some very simple exercises that could be accomplished very quickly. And then that, shortly after that, I kind of got invited to be on the board and got very, very much involved in the TPI model. And that pretty much brings us to today. That was a mouthful.
Well, I think, before we were talking, before the show started here, and I was mentioning the fact that a lot of our listeners are, not necessarily professional golfers. Most of them are, your traditional golfers. They belong to a country club. They like to get out on the weekends and play. And you're saying that even though you are on the board of TPI and you work with some professional golfers, a lot of the population that you work with is not professional golfers. So I think this is going to be great for some of the people to see how, the nutrition and the interval training really relates to them also, not just the professional athlete.
Well, absolutely. And I think, the vast majority of the people I work with are not professional. I mean, I work with just a handful of professional players, or have, any one time I might not be working with a professional player. So yeah, my bread and butter is the average person. And that's where I actually, those are the people you can enact the greatest changes as well. So yeah.
So how would you, or what would your opinion be as far as over the last, let's say, 15 years or so, golf fitness has definitely become much more popular and much more of a well-known entity in the world of golf. How would you say that it has changed the game, not just, again, not on the professional level, but let's kind of focus on that population that you're working with. What are some of the big changes that you've seen?
Well, I might not be the best person to answer this, in as much that I was not into golf in my youth. I was a rugby player, tennis player, and to be perfectly honest with you, I looked at golf as, the class. We were at a sports college, so we didn't even, I don't know if we even had a golf team, which is sort of crazy to think that we didn't have a golf team. I don't know. I mean, if we did, there was certainly didn't have much high profile. And so to me, the sports, the athletes, they were the sort of the fast runners, whether it was soccer or rugby, that sort of a thing. So, and yet I have a very different opinion of that now, obviously, having eventually become a golfer myself and then trained the golfers. I actually think it's, probably one of the most athletic movements that exists in sport, and one of the most difficult, as, which we can attest to when you look at some of the greatest athletes that have tried to become golfers later on in life, and how hard that can be for them. So because I wasn't involved in the very early days, someone that has been involved pre the fitness industry and post the fitness, so might answer it better, but I can probably give a stab at it, in as much that it was probably around when I got involved, starting getting into golf, both personally for playing and into the business, was right around when Tiger was coming out. And obviously we know he was the huge influence in changing the attitude, and as he said, hey, I do this thing a whole lot different to you guys. The old the triangle that you used to have of what was involved in the golf game, which is the model in TPI that we always put up, and now this was Tiger's model, and it was the hexagon, another 5 different elements, and one of which was the conditioning part. So I think what we're obviously seeing now, the length obviously is probably the biggest factor, I would say. Now, obviously, people would say that equipment has played a huge part in that, and obviously that's true. But I think that the fitness aspect has obviously made a huge difference in that, which obviously can change the game. I mean, I know that, a few comments that I remember one time, there was a coach chatting to me, and I think he was, maybe a few coaches in the early days might have been intimidated by TPI, and I think he was a little bit. So he was I was saying, I was talking about the success that Greg and David had with Padre Carrington in increasing his distance. And this coach was saying, well, he's not that accurate, and he was throwing some statistics at me about Padre. And I was driving with Greg one day to an event, and I brought this topic up. And Greg sort of looked at me and goes, He goes, you know what, I have no idea. He goes, he never came to us for that. He came to us and wanted to be longer. That's what we did. And I think they added like 30, 40 yards to his game, because he knew that if he could get that distance, even if he's in the rough, he'd still rather be in the rough with a pitching wedge in his hand than on the fair. Well, I perhaps shouldn't put words into his mouth, but that's certainly what the feeling I was getting from a lot of people working with the very, very top players, and the players I have, they just feel that length is just so important.
Sure. Well, I also find that in the world of golfers, at least in my own personal experience, that the guys that are pretty serious about their game start to realize that nutrition has a very big component in making them better, making their performance that much better. What would you say is one or maybe two of the biggest mistakes that you see golfers making in their fitness program, but more so on the nutrition side as opposed to the exercise side?
I don't know if your listeners are aware, we've obviously talked about Lauren and Paleo, so I am a Paleo guy. So that, when I've worked with a number of, probably more so actually on nutrition than I have with the conditioning with the professional players. And all of them I'm going to switch over to a predominantly Paleo diet. That's certainly going to be the template. So what's the biggest mistake? I would say people are eating foods that can create inflammation in the body. So, the classic sort of old food pyramid with 6 to 11 servings of grains, unless they've been educated and made the conscious choice to try and eliminate grains from the diet, then, I think they're missing out on potentially the longevity of their career. Obviously, the repetition that one has with golf, I think you might not see a huge change from tournament to tournament or even year to year in the early stages. There's probably plenty of good examples where people aren't eating that well, but they can perform well. But I think a lot of the times, and perhaps that's true also with the fitness that I didn't mention, is prevention of injury and longevity of the players. I think we are starting to see that. We're starting to see guys that are already making their debut on the senior tour, but they're competing on the PGA tour. So I think that's perhaps one of the greatest things that we're seeing is guys are going to just be able to play this game for a lot longer competitively, which could really change the whole playing field, so to speak. So I would say, obviously, I'm a Paleo guy, so anytime they're not moving to that would be the first mistake. And then probably choices of I think on the course is if they haven't made the choice to really look at blood sugar levels, and in terms of making sure that they have protein in them to help blunt that blood sugar response. If they've had a very high glycemic breakfast or something, that could play an influence in their round later when they're trying to concentrate and try and stay focused. I think that is important to make sure blood sugar levels are normal. And with that also, I've always been one to say, look, you can't always think, the pre-meal, the post-meal, all that kind of stuff. I think we've got to, first and foremost, have the long-term plan of eating well is the most important. Then you can make those choices day to day. But there aren't quick fixes. If you're eating a really, really bad diet most of the time, you can't just go, okay, I've got a big event tomorrow, I'm going to eat a good meal tonight and a good breakfast. Yeah, that might help, but that's not the approach. I think guys need to start taking control of their diet year round. And I always say, you don't need to be super strict. I think an 80-20 approach, if you follow a paleo template about 80% of the time, I then actually split the remaining 20 into what I call non-paleo unprocessed foods. That might be some brown rice, some sweet potatoes, some yams. You might even throw a little cheese in there. You might deviate out of the paleo, but it's not highly processed. And then you have that 5% where you enjoy yourself. So I think that's always been a very workable approach for me, and certainly with all of my clients, whether they're professional or amateur.
Well, I want to take a step back, and for those people that, paleo is such a common word these days, but I don't know that everybody out there listening, and myself included, that we know exactly what paleo really entails. So I'm going to have you give us kind of a layperson's description of paleo and, what it is, what it entails, how is it maybe different from, other things we've heard of, just, a simple low carb or like an Atkins diet.
Sure. Well, obviously paleo, it refers to the term pre-agricultural. So it was at the time frame, and there's lots of research on this now. So the premise is that in pre-agricultural times, what were the foods available for humans to be eating? And that would have been lean protein, so animals living off the land. So that's where it might differ with Atkins, for example, because Atkins would be bacon and sausage is fine, whereas paleo would say, I always say to my clients, if you don't recognize where that proteins come from, you better know how they've processed it. So I'm not saying that you can't get some sausages that are made of, 100% chicken breast, for example. So there are some exceptions, but for the most part, I try and get my clients to say, you should be able to recognize what that's come from. So if it's ground up and you don't know the source, I would not go with that. I would, stick with some fish, some steak, grass-fed steak, and certainly the organic is going to be preferable, but I've seen great results where people can't afford to do that. So primarily it's focusing on pretty lean protein. Obviously, no one's going to argue eating lots of vegetables. I don't think in any circles anyone ever criticizes that. There are, however, people sometimes misconstruing what a vegetable is. So a potato is not a vegetable. A potato is a tuber and would not be considered paleo. Legumes also. So a lot of people, while they're not as acidic as the beans such as pinto beans or kidney beans, red kidney beans, black beans, those sorts of beans, which are a lot more acidic to the body. Things such as peas, green beans, snow peas, or mange tout as they call them in Europe. Those are not as acidic. They're only just on the acid level, past neutral. But they still have potential inflammatory responses or autoimmune responses. I've got a couple of case study stories that were rather interesting with that. So those are in the legume category. So that was also pre-agricultural times. So legumes are out, grains are out, and then also dairying. Dairying didn't start until after the agricultural revolution. So I think in my last World Golf Fitness Summit, I was doing a lecture on paleo, and one of the things to get across what you are doing when you're drinking milk or eating dairy, and I have a picture of a woman sucking milk from the teat of a cow, which is a bit graphic, but it gets the point across of what is going on there. We're the only mammal on the planet that consumes milk past weaning, and we do it from another animal. And the growth factors that are in milk, guess what, for obviously to grow the calf, are numerous, and there is a lot of research pointing to an increase in growth. Those growth factors can get into your systemic system through receptors in the gut because they have a very close mimicry to a receptor that we have, to a compound we have in our saliva in very low concentrations to help heal your gut. As you swallow, it just is in very low concentrations and helps, as I said, heal the gut, whereas milk has these massive concentrations in it and therefore binds these receptors, causes an upregulation of these receptors. And what that means is you just have more doorways to get this growth factor into your systemic system. And I would say that's not a good idea. So those are the real things. If you go, what's paleo? It's avoiding or limiting or completely avoiding grains, avoiding or limiting legumes, avoiding or limiting grains. So grains, legumes, dairy. Obviously any processed food. And that leaves us with lean protein, lean animal protein, vegetables, fruits, nuts and seeds. Simple as that. And there's a lot of stuff out there now that there's almost been coined a term now, primal, where they're adding non-paleo foods into the mix to say, well, if it's grass-fed beef, that the milk from a grass-fed beef is primal because it's better than from a non-grass-fed cow, and I wouldn't disagree with that, but it's not paleo. So it's still milk. They still have the growth factors in. So I think, to get educated is good so you can make informed decisions.
And where would be a good resource for people to go learn more about that? I mean, can they go to your website, or is there a good place for them?
To be honest, there isn't a better website for paleo from my perspective. If you want to make sure that there are no stretching of the truth, if you like, it would be Dr. Cordain's website. That's where I would recommend you to go. So that is, you can go to mine, or we'll give mine. If you want a kind of a quick and easy summary, I actually have, perhaps that might be a good starting point, because it's got a really good summary of how to do the paleo diet on there. So you can, it's a PDF you can download off my website in the nutrition section. But Dr. Cordain's website, which is The Paleo Diet, so The Paleo Diet, PALEO diet.com, would probably be the most comprehensive if you want to get peer-reviewed references that he's published. He's got that there. He's got numerous sort of quick, frequently asked questions. It's going to be the most comprehensive. So that would probably be the other place I'd go to. You might go to mine to get a quick idea of how to implement the paleo diet, but to really get educated, that would be where to go.
Great. We'll go ahead and we'll link both of those sites up to make sure that people have the option to go to both of those. I'm going to change it up a little bit here, because another reason that I really wanted to get you on the show is interval training, high-intensity interval training. And my first exposure to you was at my TPI Level 2 fitness certification course. And that's where I really learned a lot from you regarding, not just what is interval training in its truest form, but, what are the most optimal ways to do it? What are some of the ways that people are doing it wrong? What are some of the ways that people are doing right? Because it's become so popular and so ingrained in a lot of different workout regimens and different gyms and things like that. So if you can you just give us a little bit of background first on, again, your paper, which we're definitely going to link up to your research paper, because I think it's one of the best things I've read on interval training.
Thanks.
But just a little bit about that, and then just describe it, who should be doing it, what population it's good for, and et cetera.
Yeah, sure. So some of the mistakes that people are making, I suppose the first thing when we hear the term interval training, you can use that. Anything that has intervals is going to be interval training. And, I hear people go, yeah, I'm really big into interval training. I go hard for a minute, and then I go easy for a minute. I go hard for a minute, I go easy for a minute. And as soon as I hear that, I go, okay, so you're doing what you might call high-intensity interval training. So I sort of coined the term SIT for supramaximal interval training, or you could also say sprint interval training. And there is a big, big difference with that. So in the high-intensity interval training, people, I think we went through this in the level 2. People think that 100% VO2 max, which is your maximum oxygen utilization, would be determined on a graded exercise test. So they can either increase the speed or the grade, or even both if they were doing a stress test with someone. And the point at which you can't go any longer and your oxygen utilization has been going up and eventually plateaus, the point at which it plateaus is your maximum VO2. And the elite endurance athletes might be, in the sort of high 70s, 80s, whereas, the average college-age male would be 45, female 35. Elite females are up in the sort of high 60s, 70s for the VO2. When we talk about 100% VO2 max, we're referring to the power output or the workload that was going on at the time we measured your 100% VO2 max. So let's say you were at a 10% grade on the treadmill at 5 miles per hour. So we would say that's the workload for your 100% VO2 max. Well, if you're doing a minute at that intensity, a minute on, minute off, that's not, even though that's 100% VO2 max, that's not 100% of your effort. It's not 100% in terms of sprinting. Sprinting is probably going to be more like, depending on the individual, anywhere from 150 to 250% VO2 max in terms of the ability to produce power. So that's where people really miss the boat in terms of the difference between high-intensity interval training and sprint interval training. So yeah, you can go hard for a minute at that intensity, easy for a minute, hard for a minute, and do that. But I think you're missing a huge part of the equation here, and particularly for golfers, because I always say, if you look at a sporting spectrum and you've got on one end of the continuum something like hammer throwing, and you've got on the other end marathon running or, ultra distance running, where does golf fit? Well, it's right next to the hammer thrower, right? You could argue, well, there's some walking involved, but probably not that much harder than the walking back and forth from putting the tracksuit on and off. Obviously they're doing it for longer during a meet, but the real energy output for the golfer is the swing. So it's a ballistic short duration motion. So I've always said you should be training more like the hammer thrower and a lot less like the marathon runner. So when it comes to the interval training, I want people doing real maximal stuff, sprinting as hard as they can. And as soon as you get into that type of intensity, it's well shown, and people would experience this, you need at least a 4-minute recovery to be even close to being able to get into the super maximal numbers again. So if you're kind of doing like 150 to 250% VO2 max, you're not going to be able to repeat that kind of intensity with only a minute recovery. You need much longer recoveries. So one of the things I started incorporating into the TPI model for people was, start your workout with maybe one really hard 60-second sprint. You may do two, have a 4-minute recovery and do a second one, then get into your corrective exercises, and then your metabolism will sort of come back down through the corrective exercises that aren't challenging you metabolically, let's say. And then you hit another sprint in the middle of the workout, maybe a couple more minutes there with the 4-minute recovery, and then at the end of the workout, you do another set. So you've done maybe 4 to 6 minutes of high-intensity interval training spread throughout about an hour's workout, and then you've had plenty of recovery so you can give a true all-out effort. So that's the biggest mistake I think I see, is people are choosing to do high-intensity interval training versus super maximal interval training.
And with that 4-minute recovery, is that basically kind of based on a 60-second sprint? And is that adjusted, if you're going for a shorter sprint, maybe a 20-second, 30-second, or is it always 4 minutes?
It's a great question. What I do, and there's some recent research showing actually the huge benefits of something as short as 10 seconds. Because one of the things that was looked at, and it is very true, a minute as hard as you can is very, very difficult for someone that's deconditioned to do. So, they were saying, well, what could we, it's funny when I first started lecturing on this where people are like, a minute, that's nothing. Now we're starting to go, people are appreciating a minute's a long time, and, let's do an even shorter one. But they were showing how doing a 10-second sprint can build up the ability to get to 20 seconds, and then the 20 can build up the ability to get to 30. And even a 30-second is a great approach. I've been playing around a lot more with the shorter intervals. And in terms of the recoveries there, yeah, you can definitely get shorter recoveries. So what I do, like on the intervals on the bike, I actually do on the bike. The difference with the bike, unless you have a true sprint treadmill, most people have access to a treadmill that's going to be motorized. So let's say we go 15% grade and we're at 8 miles per hour, let's say, which can be pretty challenging even for a pretty fit individual. So that's a 60-second sprint, and you can last the 60-second. Now, it's paced by the treadmill. You're going the same speed the whole time. That is very different to when you do a true all-out sprint where there's a fatigue curve. So if you then get on the upright stationary bike, which is a protocol I love, and you go as hard as you can, you're going to be much faster at the beginning than you are at the end. I mean, people with fast-twitch muscle fibers are going to see that fatigue curve, particularly in the early days. You're going like a bat out of hell at the beginning, and by the end, for a lot of people, in a 30-second sprint, they can hardly move the pedals. So 60 seconds, I find, is way too long for an all-out sprint for the vast majority of people. So 30 seconds worked really well. And the research on the upright stationary bike, the work of up in Canada, Marty Jabala's lab, they were working with a 4-minute recovery with a 30-second sprint. So it's about an equivalent sort of energy commitment, the 30-second all out versus as hard as you can for 60 on the treadmill is what I find. So I'll do a 4-minute recovery on the treadmill. and I'll do a 4-minute recovery for 30 seconds on the bike. So that's the difference I do there, even though it's the same recovery. Your question about shorter intervals, I then go with this formula. I go with if it's a 20-second sprint, I do a 3-minute recovery, and if it's a 10-second sprint, I do a 2-minute recovery.
Gotcha. And now, is this something that is good for certain populations, any population? Who do you recommend that use this?
I say everyone. I see some of the greatest gains. I think you would have seen that slide I had up of one of my clients who was 81 when he came to me. He's now like 86. I think his power output when he first came to me was about 147 watts. 2 years later, when he was, I think, 83, he got it up to 881 watts. He still, this season, just before he left back for Chicago, he hit like an 854 or something like that. So he's now 86, 3 years on. So those are the sorts of crazy results I get with the older population. So to ever try and say it's not appropriate for everyone, I think is really missing an opportunity. Now, with that said, I think you have to be, you don't jump straight into that kind of intensity. And the nice thing about some of the modalities, they're sort of, people, especially at that age, they take some time to build up. So it's not like you're putting them into a forced situation where they have to sort of go. And the bike is also great for that, for the elderly population. I do find it's probably the most effective because there isn't the balance issue that they would have going fast on a treadmill. They often are wanting to hold on, and I don't really want them holding on. It changes the intensity quite a bit. So I love the upright stationary bike for the older population. And, then they build up the tolerance to it, and then you can go as hard as you want. I don't think that there's any reason to say that this type of training isn't for a certain population. All you do is you build up slowly. If you want to say you warm up, it's not that you warm up on that day necessarily. It's more about, warming up over the days, over the weeks, over the months, so that they can gradually increase the intensity at which they do it.
And I know one of the questions that I've gotten from clients in the past and just people regarding this topic is, okay, is this something that's okay for somebody, maybe with not necessarily heart conditions, but, people as they get into their 50s, 60s are obviously worried about, what's this going to do to my heart? Is this the kind of exercise that I should do if I have high cholesterol or high blood pressure, that kind of stuff? And I know that this is definitely your background, so I want people to listen or to hear from you, your experience with this.
Yeah, I mean, in going with what I just said, that if I start with a client who's very deconditioned, let's say we take the treadmill, and I say, okay, the 4-way walking warm up is the one I like to do with my clients, and then we take the grade up to 15%. And if it's the first time they've been with me, they're looking at me with sort of wide eyes because they've never been up at 15%. But I make them realize this, we're walking at 1.5 miles per hour, and 90% of the population or more are going to be fine with that. So I go, okay, so it's not the gradient that's the problem, right? You're fine right now. And they're like, yeah, I'm fine. It's like, it's the combination of the gradient and the speed. So you think you could do this for a minute? And they go, yeah, this seems pretty easy. I said, okay, so we're going to take it to just 2.5 miles per hour. So a very deconditioned person, I might do 2.5 miles per hour. And I emphasize to them that they're in charge. I have them straddle the treadmill. I count the clock down. I said, ready, 3, 2, 1, go. So a very deconditioned person, I think in the slideshow that you would have seen the little video of a lady who was very obese, very deconditioned. We were just doing 2.5 miles per hour. She's walking, and at the end of the 60 seconds, she straddled. She's like, woo, and she's really out of breath. That was all she had. And she felt comfortable to still do that. And then we stayed at that for a while. And then as that became fairly tolerable for her, we just gradually increased the intensity. So yes, be as cautious as you want in terms of moving up. But what I tell people is the mistake I often hear with people is as they get fitter, they think they need to go longer. The big difference is as they get fitter doing this approach, they simply go harder. So they increase the speed. So the safety aspect of it is if you do it with that approach, you'll be perfectly safe. And I would argue it's unsafe not to do this type of training because rest assured in life, life demands you every now and again to have to do something very vigorously, whether it's, chasing after a grandchild that's in a park, and you're not going to worry about, are you fit enough? You're going to be concerned about that child's life. You're just going to do what you got to do. Well, if you're not fit enough to do it, and that might cause a heart attack. So how about training for that sort of a thing so that doesn't occur? Or you're changing planes. You don't think about, am I fit enough to, go as fast as I can for 5 minutes trying to get from one concourse to another with potentially two fairly heavy bags. People just do it. And that's where the sort of heart attacks often occur, less so with short duration. And actually, I don't want to get deep in the physiology of it, but the long duration stuff actually has the potential to cause a heart attack more than the short duration, believe it or not. So it actually has shown to, I'm not going to say it. I was going to get into the EKG stuff, but trust me, some of the long, slow cardio stuff can have as much of a risk factor for developing a heart attack as this. A very important study was done actually in heart failure patients. So if people have a doubt this kind of stuff is good for them if they've got any cardiovascular issues, heart failure patients with an average age of, I think, 75, I refer to this in my paper that we're going to give them a link to. It was the Wisloff study, and some of the patients were as old as 85 with heart failure. So they were post rehab on medications, and they were looking at how can we make these people better in terms of improving their VO2 max. So they had an interval group and they had a long, slow cardio group. The long, slow cardio group had I think a 13% improvement in their VO2, and the interval group had a 46% improvement in their VO2. That's not even close. But perhaps even more importantly, in people with heart failure, it was the change in morphology of the heart, what they call left ventricular remodeling. So the main chamber in your heart, the left ventricle that pumps blood to the rest of the body, that got stronger, and it had a better ejection fraction. So that means it was able to pump more blood, or the stroke volume got bigger. That's the easier way to describe it. The stroke volume, which is the blood being pumped each beat, was better. It was bigger. And that's due to the fact that it was an increased contractility with that vigor that you have with interval training that caused those changes. So when you realize it was done with that kind of a population, the vast majority of people are going to be just fine doing this. And if they are concerned, just simply start out and feel in control. I often tell people, it's like when you don't have an external stimulus, such as the grandchild I just talked about, or the plane, or something like that, or shoveling snow when you're late for work and you're worried about being late. When you're in a gym or you're in control and you don't have that external stimulus that you're moving towards, I find people don't push themselves as much. They're sort of more aware of what they can and can't do. So, and I push people, trust me, and I've never had any issue in the sort of 20 plus years I've been doing this. So nor have I had anyone ever contact me of the thousands of people that I've lectured and have told to do this. People are aware. I think the only thing you make sure you pass on to if anyone is a personal trainer listening now and they're doing this type of training with their clients, you've got to make sure that, yeah, it's all great to sort of have some encouragement and have some sort of boot camp kind of motivation, but you've got to make sure that they know they're in charge. And if they ever feel uncomfortable or uneasy, that they know that they can just stop. And most people obviously would do that regardless, but just in case there's a few out there that feel they've got to please and they push themselves a little too hard, I just make sure I get that very clear. And as I said, I've never had any issue with it at all.
Well, I can speak from my personal experience and say that once I really started integrating it in this model into my training with my clients, I mean, first of all, my clients love it because now they don't have to go do 45 minutes of cardio on their own like they thought they had to. And so they can get a lot more work done in a much, much shorter period of time, which I think for most of the people listening, we've all got our jobs, we've got our families. And if you're wanting to get your strength training done, your workouts, your metabolic work, and get out and practice and play, when you have a full-time job, something like this can really shave time off of your time in the gym and your ability to reach that peak performance, which I think is fantastic.
Oh, yeah. I mean, my workouts usually aren't much more than 30 minutes. I mean, it's a 30-minute workout. I only usually do that about 3 times per week. And I turn 50 next month, and I feel I'm potentially even fitter than when I was in my 20s playing rugby at a top level. So So, combination of paleo and the interval training have been a big part of that, along with a very, simple approach to sort of the strength training. I just kind of make sure I always push something, pull something, squat something, deadlift something, and lunge. And with those, 5 simple movements, I've found that, I've maintained strength, power, and everything else. So most people are usually surprised to hear that I'm turning 50.
Sometimes we make it too complicated. Can you repeat those again, those 5 things? Because I think that's something great that the listeners can.
Yeah, I mean, all my workouts with my clients and myself, I'm listen, I'm not talking about bodybuilding. Obviously, that's for those that are into that, defer to someone that specializes in that. But I'm talking about performance. And so when we perform, we use our whole body. So I've always adopted that philosophy. I train with my whole body when I go and train. And, I'm not knocking, obviously, I understand that there's some protocols out there. If you want to focus on one body part for strength, that can work. But for me, I've always tried to say, hey, when I go in, I want to cover all the movements. So, if we think about very primal times, I think may have been Paul Chek coined it in terms of the primal movements. In order to survive, we needed to push. So I always have a push movement, so that could be push-ups. It could be single arm cable decline chest presses. It could be incline. It could be double arm. It could have rotation, no rotation. If you go to the TPI site and look at the exercise library, you've got there's a few hundred exercises that would involve a push movement. So I have, it might be a TRX and you're doing push-ups off that, right? So I do a push. The opposite of that, I do a pull. All right, very important for golfers, the pull motion. So I make sure there's a pull movement in there. I like single arm stuff as well. I'll do a squat. Very important to be able to, we always say that it's one of the highest correlations we found with early extension was basically, there's a 99% correlation. If people that couldn't do an overhead deep squat, there'd be a 99% chance of them early extending. There is the lunge, another movement that we needed in primal movements. So the lunge pattern, the deadlift, which I think is, Gray Cook will tell you, he likes people to do a 2-to-1 ratio of deadlifting to squatting. We tend to be sort of quad dominant. We've got to get that back chain much, much better. So the deadlift would be the other one. So you've got 3 sort of lower bodies and 2 upper bodies. And I'm not saying I don't do other stuff, obviously, but if I'm in a hurry, so long as I get those 5 in, I've pretty much covered most. You think about not many muscles I wouldn't have hit in those 5 movements.
I think that's a great philosophy to go into. For somebody that's just, maybe they don't have a written out program, maybe they're on the road, they go to a hotel gym or something, just doing that push, pull, squat, lunge, and deadlift, and you're in and you're out. I think that's fantastic.
Yeah, it really is. I mean, especially if you're an amateur player who might not have a lot of time, and that way, they're going to be in pretty good shape. If they went into the gym, they did just one sprint on the treadmill for 60 seconds, as hard as they could do. They come off that. They do a squat movement, whether it's goblet squats or sumo squats or something like that. They then go into perhaps the push pattern. Then, so let's say they did a set of push-ups to fatigue. Then they go to the deadlift. They could do a Romanian deadlift with dumbbells. It's probably best for most of these people. Then they could do a pull pattern. They could do, if they've got a TRX, they could do some pulls. Or they've got a cable column. They could do single arm incline pulls with rotation, switch to the other side. I love that exercise. And then they finish with lunge pattern, just maybe body weight lunges. And then they go to an upright stationary bike and bang out 2 30-second sprints as hard as they can. They could be in and out of there in 20 minutes.
Perfect. All right, Mark, I'm going to switch gears a little bit again, and we're going to get into a few rapid-fire questions here, because I know we're...
I'll tell you what, I'm going to jump in with one on the interval training. I want to just talk briefly, because it's become... I've seen it so much. I'm actually in the process of writing an article, and it will be one of my next things on the off-the-mark thing, which we'll mention at the end. But you've heard of, obviously, Tabata intervals, right?
Yep.
So it's the big thing, and certainly in CrossFit it got huge, and it's sort of amusing to me as someone where, obviously in my article, the paper that we're going to reference, I obviously referred to the research of Tabata, but it was one study, and it's amazing to me how certain people have almost made it the pinnacle of interval training. And I just want to kind of make a point. I don't think it's the best interval protocol out there. And I want to explain a couple of things where people really misconstrue. And it almost, if you want to do high intensity interval training, I'd say it's a good protocol. All right. But I've already said, I think you're missing the boat if you want to do super maximal interval training, which is better, certainly for golf, and I think for anything. So I talked about, the intensity. Now, they did do a pretty high intensity, but it's still not an all-out intensity. And particularly for a lot of people that are capable of the 250% VO2 max or more. All right. The protocol that Tabata used was 170% VO2 max, 20 seconds. Then they did a 10-second recovery, and they did 7 to 8 repetitions of that. Okay, so if we look at that, that's like over 2 minutes worth of activity. All right, so it's well over the 60-second mark, which I have referenced before is kind of the optimal. That's as long as one can go to be really up high in the super maximal. So when you're talking that sort of 250%, as hard as you can go, true sprinting. Okay. Once you hit 60 seconds, the drop-off in intensity is exponential. You hit a wall there. Every human does, all right? It's just the fact that lactic acid at about 60 seconds reaches such a peak that it inhibits muscle contraction. Anyone that's run once around the track as fast as they can in college or high school, or if they're still doing it later in life, will attest to that. Not a human on the planet can go super maximally past 60 seconds. So this protocol isn't super maximal. So once you've got into, you've got, you're going way beyond with 20 seconds here. After the first 3, you're into that sort of what I would call sort of waste of time work, unless you're doing high intensity interval training. So there are 2 things that people do. Either they're doing it at about 170% and they're able to manage to maintain the same intensity for all 7 to 8 reps. And if they're doing that, okay, they're doing high-intensity interval training. And I think for the sort of endurance-type athlete, that's probably a pretty good protocol in combination with the super maximal training. But for your speed power athletes, I'd say they're wasting their time once they've gone past the 3rd interval. So if they're going, so there's 2 ways of doing it. You do the 170% and you maintain the same power output for all 7 to 8 intervals. Or what a lot of people do, which is not Tabata, is they go as hard as they can on the first one, as hard as they can on the second, as hard as they can on the third, and they just start to go. That's the approach I would rather you do. But, so I do a version, if you like. I do a lot of 20s with a 10 recovery 20s, but guess what? I don't do more than 3. Because if they're giving me all they've got, after the third one, they're going to give me nothing. They're just sort of hanging in there. What is going to be more beneficial at that point is to rest for 4 minutes and get back to giving me some quality. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. And I think after that, once you hit that peak, you hit that 60 seconds, that's when you see people's form go out the window. That's when you see injuries start to occur because, maybe they're trying to go as hard as they can, but they just don't have it anymore. And so they're pushing through, and now they're compensating. And then that's when a lot of the issues arise. I 100% agree with that.
Yeah. So I'm going to, in this article I'm writing, I'm going to start coining the term, everyone said Tabatas, I'm going to start calling them Jabalas, Marty Jabala up in Canada. So we want more people doing that, which is 30 seconds, 4-minute recovery, 30 seconds, 4-minute recovery. Because if you give me on the bike everything you have for 30 seconds, you think 4 minutes is too long to what you're going to be going, is that 4 minutes already gone? I've got another 30 seconds to go. And you do 4 of those, that's just 2 minutes worth. That was the study. That's the thing. Yes, the results were quite good with Tabata, but nowhere near as impressive as the results of the protocol that Marty Jabala had. So when they start to understand that, just choose a better protocol. So if you're doing Tabatas, my recommendation is don't do the same, go as hard as you can for that first 20 seconds. Take a 10-second recovery, do it again, 10-second recovery, do it again. And after the third one, take a 4-minute rest and then go and do another set of that. And potentially I'd say, do 4 sets of 320s with 10 seconds recoveries. That's going to be a better protocol for you.
And that 4-minute rest, that's a perfect time, like you said before, to do some of your corrective exercises and stretches, correct?
Well, actually, you can, but that 4 minute, if you give everything for 30 seconds, I usually just have people stay on the bike cycling slowly. They're usually not much good for doing anything, even if it was a stretch, or a single leg balance or something like that. So I'm really not looking to do the correctives even in that. You could. Now, when I had said earlier, the longer recovery, spreading them out, that would be after a minute's worth, where if you don't want to take a 4-minute recovery and repeat and do another one. So if you want to fit it into a long workout, yes, that's when you would do that. I thought you were just sort of talking like if you were focusing on just the interval training, I would just have people cycle slowly. But if you want to spread those 60-second intervals, whether it's a full 60 seconds or the mini approach, which like we just talked about, doing 3 20s with a 10-second recovery between each one, you could do one and then, yes, absolutely go and do a set of corrective exercises and then come back. But you're looking at more like a 15-minute recovery before you go and do another one. Otherwise, it seems like you wouldn't have enough time to do much in 4 minutes, right?
Right. That's a great
clarification. But that's and so the question might be, is there a negative in taking a longer than 4-minute recovery? I say no, particularly for the golfer, all right? Because if you look at the work to rest interval in golf, it's huge, right? You've got one very ballistic swing, maybe a couple of practice swings. How long is it before, that lasts a few seconds, and you've got a matter of minutes before you have another swing, potentially even 5 minutes between shots in a professional round. So nothing wrong in having, long spaces, because it's about quality, not quantity. And the longer the recovery, the more quality you'll give me in the interval.
Excellent. Well, let's wrap it up with just a couple quick questions here that I know the listeners want to hear your answers. Just a couple, short and sweet answers, a couple fast ones. What would you say is a great breakfast, pre-game breakfast and on-course snack?
Breakfast. I'd like some turkey omelet. How about turkey omelet with vegetable and turkey omelet would be a great breakfast. On the round, I always tell my players basically mini meals. So you make some turkey for that omelet. Perhaps I would chop that up, put it in a Ziploc. You can always put all of this in a cooler and an ice cooler in your golf bag. It's easy to do. I would have potentially some, healthy jerky that's not got all the nitrates added to it. I'd have some nuts. I'd have an apple, a banana. So real food. There's a great company and there's some good bars out there all based around paleo products for the sort of snacking world. And I've got a list of stuff that's available on my website for that. But more than anything, just kind of mini meals, some protein, some nuts, you can certainly have some little carrots, some pieces of broccoli, anything you like. Just make it real food.
All right. And I mentioned at the beginning of this whole interview that we want to get to know you as a person, and I think that one of the things that really connects people to the guests on the show is finding out, what are some of the struggles that you as, Dr. Mark Smith, nutrition specialist, interval stress specialist, what is something that you struggle with in your own nutritional daily habits?
Let me think. I think, I think it's easy to take that 20%, when I say it's an 80-20, it can be easy to suddenly find yourself in 25, 30, because if you're eating too much of the 20%, particularly the 5%, those guys, you ever read the book, The Fast Food Nation? These companies do a lot of research in getting kids in particular addicted to food. So, if you start to just push that a little too much, all of a sudden you start to get cravings for it if you're not careful. So I suppose like anyone, there are certain foods that I like. I love chips and salsa. So, if I go to a Mexican restaurant before I know it. So I've got to be careful not to, I just be sensible. I don't buy that and have it in the house. So the only time I can really have it is when I'm out and I go to a Mexican restaurant. But I'll make up for it when I have the meal. I don't have beans and rice. I switch that out for vegetables. So you can always make sensible choices there to do that. But, one of the great things is I've found the paleo diet very easy to do, and I enjoy it. So I'm pretty good. I definitely, when people see me out, I don't look like a freak that never has anything. I always have, I kind of have whatever I want when I'm out. I think I'll try and keep it in moderation in terms of the volume, but that allows me then, I focus on the good stuff at home, which makes up that 80% of the eating that I do. So I can enjoy myself out and not feel I'm, depriving myself.
All right. And you have the opportunity to work at Mission Hills on a daily basis. How's your golf game?
Well, let's put it this way. In terms of work at Mission Hills, I've got 3 great golf courses that I can play anytime, right? After this, I was playing in October. Since October, and they reseeded, I've played once at Mission Hills. I was very fortunate to go and play out at the Madison, which is probably one of the best courses in the desert here. Dr. Bobby Duvall got me out there. And then one other course. I think I've played 3 times since last October. So how's my golf game? How do you think it is?
About like
you
mine.
know what? Actually, it's as good as it's ever been for as little as I've been playing. My short game, my chipping is bad, which would to be expected. But my driving has been very good. I've been very pleased with that. I get a little frustrated. I would say one of the things I struggle with the most is almost the mental part of the game. I don't focus. I've got to get much better at that. I've got to get into if you're familiar with the Vision 54, I went through their program, which I think is really, really good. And if people want to play good golf now, I'd thoroughly recommend them looking into that. If they go to vision54.com, they can read into that. But I also know that you've got to put the time in to go through their programming to get better at that. It is a time issue in terms of for all of us in the golf industry. Very often, we work in the industry, but we don't get out there perhaps and practice and play as much as we would like. But so I would say that I'm very inconsistent. I mean, I've been very fortunate to play with a gentleman called Hugh Baiocchi, one of the greatest and nicest guys you'll ever meet. He played on the European Tour. I think his best finish in the British Open was 8th. He played in a number of the Masters, and he did very, very well on the senior tour. I think he won 4 times on the senior tour. And I love going out and playing with him because he's really good at helping and just giving, he'll just say, I think you're swinging too fast. Or it won't be very technical. It'll be very simple advice that will help you do something very quickly to change and do it very well. But so I go out and play with him quite a bit. And he laughs because there's a bunch of guys here at Mission Hills. They're always trying to get, Dr. Mark to come out and play. And they like to put a little bet on the line. And they're all like, well, what's he play off? And he was like, well, he plays some holes like he's scratch and he plays other holes like he's a 20 handicap. Got no idea. So consistency is where I'm at. Right now, I think I actually figured last year I should get it. I started putting cards in. So I actually carry an index of 11.3, but I do well if we play any scrambling with that because, as I said, I can shoot plenty of birdies, but I'll blow up on a few holes every time. It seems hard for me to just keep that going for all 18 holes. But every summer, this is where I now have a little bit of downtime. It's a very seasonal job out here at Mission Hills, so I promised myself I'm going to put some time into the game this summer. So ask me that question. We'll see at the World Golf Fitness Summit if I can get my handicap down any lower this summer.
Sounds good. I'll be sure to do that.
I shouldn't have said that.
Yeah, I'm going to hold you to it.
Okay. Now, well, maybe that's good I said that. Now I'm going to feel I've got to do some work this summer.
There we go. All right, Doc, one last thing. Is there any last pieces of advice that you could give our listeners regarding just an action step that they can take for their fitness program, nutrition program, just to kind of get them started on the right foot if they're struggling a little bit?
I think I would get a program on the fitness side of things. While we've taught some simple things doing it. We talked about the squat. A squat can be quite a difficult movement for people. So just to go out there on your own sometimes, it's not hugely expensive. I would go to the TPI site. I would find yourself a certified trainer, get a program designed for you, look at the limitations you have, and get those corrected. I can't tell you how many people with the TPI model I've helped out here at Mission. I had a guy call me the other day. He had stopped playing. He was going to give up his membership because he had so much back pain. I just simply went through the TPI level 1 screen, didn't even do the level 2. He wasn't ready for level 2. We didn't do any power or strength, just the movement screen. And his issue was hugely around the pelvis. And we just got him doing some simple cats and dogs, then some standing pelvic tilts with, holding the golf club, take that away, doing the pelvic rotations, the disassociation drills. It was as simple as that. Played golf within about 2 weeks after doing, some workouts with me, doing that, focusing in on that. You played around pain-free. You couldn't believe it, So I think getting the screen and getting that is probably the most important. And because otherwise, there's a bit of guesswork in that,
Sure. And lastly, tell us where our audience can find more about you, the things that you're doing, all the stuff you have coming up, and we'll go ahead and link all that stuff up on the show notes page too.
The easiest would be you can link to my blog off my main website. So my main website is pretty simple, just Doc Smith, DOC Smith, docsmith.org, O-R-G, so docsmith.org, and it's actually undergoing another rehaul right now, so it'll be changing soon, but it's like on the exercise, I think I only have the article up because that's under reconstruction, and I'm actually going to redo the whole thing. So, but it's got a format, it's got the information there, and the blog is going to become a full blog soon. At the moment, it's just the Facebook page. I've just really started that idea, and it's really trying to. It's Milo Bryant. I've got to give a thumbs up to. We were talking about. It started when, and it still might happen, doing on my TPI TV. All of us were sort of asked if we wanted to do some TV shows. And the idea, I think, I wanted to do a show, and this is kind of where the article came from. So many times we'll have two different opinions, on anything, whether it be movement and exercise or nutrition. And I like to say, hey, I'm ready to, I've got an opinion, but I'm ready to be open-minded as I really am to be changed. If you can persuade me otherwise and show me with research or good clinical work that I was wrong, hey, I'll be your biggest fan and supporter. So the idea of it was to sort of take two topics of differing opinions, and I'm going to choose which one is off the mark, because it's off the mark, but they're also off the mark. The other side is on the mark, and that one's off the mark. That was kind of the pun of it. And Milo we were bantering around with some ideas, and Marlo goes, no, you got to do off the mark. I was like, that's a good one. So that's what that is. And, I'm halfway through one on this Tabata. I'm going to go into a bit more detail on that. So I'm going to be like, that would be off the mark because it's not as good as it could be. And there's a lot of different, I'm going to big on the GMO and artificial sweeteners. That's another thing. Yeah, definitely get off the artificial sweeteners. An absolute must for all golfers. We won't dwell on it now. You can look for that in my Off the Mark next blog.
Awesome. Well, Doc, I just want to thank you for your time today. And I want to thank you personally and publicly for all the help that you've given me. I know I've reached out to you a couple times, and you're always very quick to respond and get back to me and help me, learn a little bit more, put me in the right direction where I can find some more information and education. So just personally, very, very big thank you to you for that. Well,
that's my pleasure. And obviously, I can say the same to other people. It's just a journey, isn't it, of passing. I've been very fortunate being on the board to be able to take all of the great certifications. I mean, I think I've come a long way in as a practitioner since I became a TPI board member, because I'm able to do all of the certifications, and they're really good. When you've got over 50 people from all around the world in their own disciplines contributing to the curriculum, it's a great program, and that's made me a much better practitioner. All of the people that we meet, and while you say I might be giving you help, you come right back at me, and it helps me as well when I listen to guys like yourself hearing from me. So it's both ways, and it's my pleasure to do it.
Well, thank you again, the 18 Strong listeners. Thank you, and we hope to catch up with you soon.
Thanks, Jeff.
All right, talk about a jam-packed interview full of knowledge and education. Like I said, Dr. Mark Smith is one of the most intelligent guys I know in regards to the research that he's done, the education that he has, talking about these different areas of the golf game: health, fitness, diet, nutrition, all that stuff. So just a couple things that I take from this episode is your workouts don't have to be extremely complicated and long. As long as you're pushing yourself, as we talked about in the high-intensity stuff, you're going to get maximum benefits. And, just cover the basics. As a little bit of a reminder, push something, pull something, squat, deadlift, and lunge. If you put all of those into your workout when you're doing a total body or you're on the road and you cover those 5 bases, you've pretty much got yourself covered, and you're going to have a good workout. So lastly, again, Mark talks about it thoroughly. Nutrition is key, not just on the course, but off the course as well. You got to create those habits. When you create those habits, you're not only going to improve your golf game, you're going to improve your lifestyle, you're going to improve your quality of life, and hopefully going to improve the longevity of your life as well. So thanks again for tuning into the 18 Strong podcast. Again, all the notes and links will be on the show notes page at 18strong.com. Look us up on Facebook, and lastly, of course, who do you want on the show? What questions do you want answered? Let me know. Shoot me a message on Twitter at Jeff Pellizzaro, and just give us some information. We want to give you the goods that you want. So thanks again. Remember, if you're on Twitter, hashtag 18strong, and always appreciate a review on iTunes. So thank you guys. Appreciate the listens and really appreciate the feedback. And don't forget, you got to train hard, practice smart, and play better golf. Adios.
Thanks for listening to the 18 Strong podcast at www.18strong.com. And remember, train hard, practice smart, and play better golf.